Day 1249 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,059,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,010 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 1 tank, no APVs, 52 artillery, and 3 multiple launch rocket systems. And now to the map activity, with the approximate overnight flight routes of Ukrainian UAVs to be seen on the map, where the color coding includes red arrows for the direction of Ukraine's UAV strikes, blue arrows for the direction of Ukraine's jet-powered UAVs, a segment now marked for red-hot growth, and purple arrows, which is the direction of unmanned surface vessels, or USVs, identified at the bottom of the map navigating the Black Sea. And as for a later addition, the production of Ukrainian ballistic missiles that will surely make their mark this year on the map as well. Now to zoom into the map, as Ukrainian drones targeted the Tatsinskaya railway junction in Russia's Rostov region, where local reports confirm the presence of fuel tankers at the site during the attack. This occasion follows a similar incident from just yesterday, with the targeting of the same station, which is militarily significant to Russia as a key rail hub supporting the Tatsinskaya oil depot and military supply lines, including diesel traction for troop movements connecting to Russia's eastern territories, leading to these types of strikes, which all come courtesy of Ukraine's strategic aim to hinder Russia's ability to transport resources efficiently, rewriting and reshaping the battlefield dynamics. And then, also to be found in the Rostov region, an S-300 or S-400 battery suffered a catastrophic cold launch failure, with eyewitness reports from Bataisk that detailed a massive explosion at the military site, but leaving local authorities rather tight-lipped on the incident. Social media chatter revealed a large flurry of ambulance inbound, suggesting a certain scale in outcome for the failed launch. Now, as for a cold launch failure, what exactly is that? Well, it's a malfunction that occurs when a missile fails to ignite its engines during the initial phase of launch, typically while being ejected from its launcher, which therefore means that the status of the launcher itself could likely have become significantly compromised in this incident. Then, on the map, and just prior to these events overnight, and headed in the direction of them, was Russian air defense that had become activated over occupied Luhansk, specifically at Dovzyansk, which is very close to the international border, some 160 kilometers or 100 miles from the front lines, and where you can see in this footage the red tracer rounds fired into the night sky, designed to illuminate the trajectory of fire of the projectiles, but in this case, really quite short-lived tracer rounds, perhaps coming from a deviation in traditional quality outputs of the munitions, either due to aged munition stockpiles, or even substandard new production quality. Almost equally a chance for either. And then next on the map to Bryansk, with the OJSC Bryansk plant of metal structures and technical equipment reported to be struck, with at least 10 explosions heard. There's also an oil depot in quite close proximity to this haze of vapor, but this smoky instance might not be thick enough or black enough to constitute the untimely befallen ways of successfully struck oil depots. Now into the Ukrainian map on the Pokrovsk axis, with limited changes to be found on this part of the map today, but indeed with a couple of interesting updates, with the most recent failure of momentum of Putin's army due to a number of brigades operating out of this area, not the least of which is this example coming from Ukraine's Svoboda unit of the Rubiz brigade, targeting 3 Russian personnel by means of a fiber optic FPV in Fedorivka, as the introduction of this brigade reflects the AFU's strategic redeployment of elite units to counter Russian advances in Donetsk, with this unit coming quite a long way from the further north Seversk direction that they had been operating out of just prior. But then as for Russia's latest strategies, with their focus in this very region, as their forces have now turned to dropping leaflets via drones over the main town of their most inner, immediate invasion desires, urging residents to expose Ukrainian positions for their own swift liberation to a better Russian life. Bring the liberation of your city closer, it says. Although the overall leaflet's tone and language could be perceived as a little coercive or threatening, which could further complicate the situation. Tactically speaking, the leaflet drops suggest a little bit of desperation as well, as the Russian army is dealing with operating with incomplete intelligence on Ukrainian unit locations, likely due to effective AFU countermeasures alongside the challenges of urban terrain and the various technical challenges of the Russian army. Then to head across on the map, because as for Chasiv Yar, also a location that lacks any discernible momentum with the Russian forces following their claim of complete town capture just a few days ago, though we did see a little bit of e-scooter momentum of the invader army, as per these coordinates, observed as they rode into the sunset west of Bakhmut in the direction of Chasiv Yar to bolster future offensive efforts, amid the backdrop of an untidy road and destroyed Russian armor along their way. So much majesty with this army. Next, to the Kherson direction, with a massive strike seen on Russian positions as the Ukrainian Defense Forces hit another of the little bit too large Russian field ammunition depots that they are occasionally found to enjoy stockpiling. And then to touch on this region a little bit further, as for the troop composition for Ukraine, as it appears to be rather meager, especially following the redeployment of several key brigades 6 to 12 months ago, where the Ukrainian garrison along this 180 kilometer, or about 110 miles stretch, would you believe it, line of contact separated by the river, has the vast majority of their manpower stationed along the southernmost half beyond the river. So, as for a modest estimate, Ukrainian manpower positioned along here is about 12k soldiers, with an argument that could be made for a still very low 15k if you include the territorial defense forces. The threat of invasion is lower for this area as opposed to the Eastern Front. Nonetheless, personalities from the Russian state media never cease in their promises to invade Odessa. Then to look across the map with the armed forces of Ukraine's dragon drones back in the spotlight, spraying their glimmering and shimmering thermite cocktails on unsuspecting Russian positions in this case. Then also seen higher in the skies, where a Ukrainian Air Force Yak-52 light attack aircraft politely escorted a Russian Shahed 136 kamikaze drone over the western region as it patiently awaited the opportune moment to intercept, ensuring that any falling wreckage byproduct wouldn't endanger nearby residential areas. Now to the news, with Russian President Vladimir Putin declaring that he is ready to end Russia's military activities in Ukraine immediately, but only if Ukraine meets two sweeping demands. First, a full withdrawal of its troops from all of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, plus a formal renunciation of the country's NATO membership ambitions. There was no talk of a broader peace deal, and this announcement was specifically referring to only a ceasefire. It's just a shame that we already know what Russian ceasefires repeatedly look like. It's almost as if they have different meanings for the same words. And for this announcement, there was no mention of Crimea, and certainly no mention of any Russian withdrawals anywhere along Ukrainian territory, just terms designed to cement battlefield gains and leave Ukraine carved up and more vulnerable. Kremlin insiders had previously commented a few days ago that Putin sees no logic in halting offensives now, with Putin purportedly convinced that Russian forces are advancing and that US economic sanctions are a bluff. It was also said that Putin's generals have told him dubiously that Ukrainian lines could collapse within 2 to 3 months. 2 to 3 days, 2 to 3 months. It all seems like a very similar numbering theme. And with the timing of this Vova announcement, it's certainly deliberate on two accounts. Firstly, there's Trump's special envoy to Russia, real estate lawyer turned negotiator Steve Witkoff, who landed in Moscow for a 3-hour 3-hour meeting with Putin as part of last-ditch effort talks ahead of a Trump-imposed Friday deadline, but most surely had low hopes for such a diplomatic exchange. And just for the record, a meeting that happened after Putin's announcement on his latest conditions for a ceasefire. Now, as for what's on the table for Friday, sanctions on Russia's secretive shadow fleet tankers that are funding the Russian war by dodging oil caps that secretly ferry Russian crude to markets like China and India, dodging G7 price caps at $60 a barrel, which is set to officially go down to $47.60 a barrel on September 3rd. The Trump administration has also been quite vocal on the option of secondary sanctions and tariffs aimed at countries continuing to purchase Russian oil and other energy exports as part of the US pressure campaign on the Putin war. Now, as for the Ukrainian response to Putin's hot offer on willingly ceding land, which would only lead to a free ride for Russia, who would inevitably resume their SMO based on whatever new excuse they come up with at the time, thereby further undermining Ukraine's future defensive options. Well, in response, Ukrainian leadership swiftly rejected Putin's ceasefire deal as a non-starter. Kyiv officials dismissed it as, quote, surrender dressed up as diplomacy. All the meanwhile, Zelensky is negotiating a drone for arms deal with the United States, strengthening military cooperation, and with the country securing further funding from the EU to purchase additional arms from the States. All very stable choices because, after all, the latest Russian announcement doesn't, or shouldn't, come as any sort of surprise to most. They are all in on this war, to their very likely own destruction. Meanwhile, and while Ukraine apparently only has 2 to 3 months left, according to Russian generals, this leads into the hardware news, as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, on a separate account, are jointly funding the acquisition of US-made weapons for Ukraine, contributing nearly $490 million to this latest aid cause for Ukrainian defense and wider EU security measures. Then to follow on with more hardware news updates on the localized production front. And for the first time in Ukraine, an Odessa-based company has unveiled its Shahed jet interceptor, the jet-propelled Mongoose drone. This is a reusable UAV with a jet engine and an automatic homing system. Its design is such that it flies up to enemy kamikaze strike drones through that autonomous ability, fires a shot charge at the engine or propeller, and then continues the mission or return. It can reach speeds of over 300 kilometers per hour or nearly 200 miles per hour, and has a maximum flight altitude of 5,000 meters or thereabouts 16,000 feet, and a combat radius of approximately 12 kilometers, with those last two figures comparable to many Western short-ranged missile-based air defense systems, including that of the IRIS-T SLS variant, and even the NASAMS running on AIM-9X missiles. And so, of course, the key distinction here, apart from the lower price, is being the impressive reusability factor of these platforms. It's some very impressive innovations we're seeing here. So that has to be it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I really do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!